idea. I'm all for transparency.
So let's start with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for Tove and his ministry and his love for you and his family. Lord, thank you for this time together, and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So what I'd like to do is, I'm not going to start at the very beginning, but I'd like to cover a lot of material to try to bring you up to speed.
That works for me.
So I quote a lot from Neusner. He's the he is the most published person in Midrash, and he wrote probably 950 volumes, and he said that the Septuagint translation contains element of Jewish exegesis, and it's obvious. It was, after all, a product of Jewish scribes or scholars. In analyzing the exegetical tradition in transmitted Septuagint manuscripts, modern scholars face a crucial decision whether to date Midrash traditions in respect to their occurrence in the Greek Torah, or to explain Septuagintal changes as textual variants and the Midrash's commentary on earlier Hebrew texts, other than the so-called Masoretic one, the Textus Receptus, common in the Middle Ages onwards. In the first case, we have to postulate an influence of the Septuagint on rabbinic Midrash. In the second case, we have to date rabbinic exegetical tradition as early as the first century. So I think both of them really are true. What do you think?
I totally agree with you. I do believe that both are true. I think there's an important place for the Masoretic text. I do, however, believe that the Masoretic text has taken on a far too important a place in modern scholarship, and the Septuagint has fallen away as in its important place and prestige, and it needs to be recovered a bit because of its importance, along with the Targum translations as well.
You mind using or actually showing me so I can so I can watch you as you talk? No, I was just
sorry about that. I didn't realize I turned that. I didn't realize I turned my camera
no, it's just helpful for me to, yeah. So anyway, so I quote Neusner a lot, and so the what we talk about a lot is the different literary devices in both the Septuagint and the letter. Here we have this idea of a loan word. So a loan word is, as you know, a transliteration of a Hebrew word. It's used within the Midrash in Hebrews 9:4. And here we see it's used within the source text. So we were in, so here we have Galatians 3:19. So Galatians 3:19 has words right out of the Exodus translation. So here we have, then why is the law? It was added because of transgressions until the offspring should come to whom the promise has been made. It was ordained through angels by the hand of a mediator. And so in this section of Exodus, we have this idea that God sends the quail and gives the manna, and there's a manna enough to eat. And the rock yields water at Horeb. But it's like, how did he get this out of this?
Right.
It's like, there's no way you could see that. Well, this is the in Exodus 6, 16 through 18. So here's this idea of manna is within here, but the Galatians is not down here. So then we have this idea of manna within this section of Numbers. All right, so manna was like coriander seed. Its appearance was like bdellium. And here we have this idea, whole pattern in 2 Timothy, this pattern of sound words, which you've heard from me in faith and love, which is a Messiah issue. And then he goes on to say, may the Lord grant mercy to the house of Onesiphorus, for he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chain. There doesn't look like there's any evidence of manna here, right? So there's no manna. It doesn't look like there's any manna here. Doesn't look like there's any manna here. So it's like, okay, so how about Deuteronomy? All right, so Deuteronomy is this next place, all right, that there's a midrash. And so here's 1 Timothy. And here we have this idea, for 40 years he fed them manna, and then man does not live by bread alone. So in this section of 2 Timothy, we have this idea of, is there a midrash of manna in this section? So the man Messiah Yeshua gave himself as a ransom for all, the testimony at proper time. I desire that therefore that men in every place pray, decent clothing, modesty, tranquil and quiet life. So is there a manna here? And then the idea of, okay, well, it's in Joshua, and that's where the manna stopped, of course. So here the manna ceased and they ate the fruit of the land. Okay, so whose mouths must be stopped? So that sounds like the manna ceased. So he's bringing it out of there. But what about all the other ones? Well, in this one, it looks like when you say Onesiphorus, he often refreshed me, that sounds like, Tov, you're manna to heaven to me. You know, it's like a compliment. He's saying that to Onesiphorus. So looks like he's complimenting Onesiphorus. And I think in the other ones, you could find this idea of as well, the offspring should come. Jesus is manna, the bread of life. And so I think in every single one, you can kind of see this idea, and you can kind of get a summary of the word manna. So here we have, take a look at this Hebrews 9, 2 through 5. After the second veil was the tabernacle called the Holy of Holies. So in this section of Genesis, we have the word Padan Aram, which means tableland. So it's clear that this idea of the table holding the manna is within this section of the tableland. So even though some of these kind of things are obtuse, he always seems to make a connection if you look for it.
Yep.
So then in Hebrews 9:1, he says, it talks about the ordinances of the divine service, which we just we're looking at right here, which things we can't speak now in detail. So this idea is that he hasn't spoken of them yet, or he would have said, which in my other letters I've already spoken about, right? So in the other details, he speaks about the tabernacle, the lampstand, the table, the golden censer, the Aaron's rod, the cherubim. And in Galatians and in Hebrews, Second Timothy, Romans. So this suggests internal evidence that Hebrews was written before these other ones, these other letters, which makes sense because Hebrews, a midrash of Genesis, you would think he wrote it before Galatians, which puts a whole new light on what was the occasion that he wrote it. If it was early, then it was after First and Second Thessalonians, and it was after First and Second Corinthians, but it was before Galatians, before Romans. So it makes you think that perhaps, as has suggested rarely, that perhaps Hebrews was a prison epistle, and I think it was like his amicus curiae to Caesar, and I think Luke wrote his gospel, and so I think Luke and Hebrews were Paul's get out of prison amicus curiae. Now, that's my perspective, but you got to think, if Hebrews was written early and it was written by Paul, then it logically was written before the Midrash on Exodus, since it's a Midrash on Genesis. So this idea of this obtuse kind of references to different things is more than that. Paul actually builds in structure into his midrash. So here we have this idea of in Genesis 24:7 through this idea of gold, 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 and then in Hebrews we have this idea of gold, 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 and then in Hebrews we have Yeshua has become the collateral of a better covenant. And then in Genesis, we have Jacob rolling the stone away from the mouth and watering the flock. So this idea of through his rolling the stone away and his resurrection, he's become the collateral of a better covenant. And here we have this idea of Jacob. So we have this this kind of intersecting idea here with this idea of gold and manna and Jacob and Yeshua. So all this is quite interesting, and obviously this is just the surface of it. This idea that manna is like coriander, which means to gash, and bdellium, which means distinguish, makes you think that Yeshua is this distinguished and gashed seed and proclaimed himself the true bread of heaven. So I think he really takes into account the Greek, but he does not ignore the Hebrew by any means, which really puts it into the class of a Hellenistic Jewish midrash, which Neusner, and I'll quote him again, on another page of that same book, said it doesn't exist. A Hellenistic Jewish midrash written in Greek does not exist. So then there's this idea of first use words. And can we really exegetically change modern hermeneutics and say, listen, first century Christians didn't have the Bible, the New Testament, and their Bible was the Septuagint. And this guy here, Mansour, says that the Septuagint was the Bible for the first century Christians, and it gradually fell out of favor with the Jews partially because of that. Also because there were some Jews who said, hey, listen, translating the Bible into Greek is as bad as a sin as the golden calf. So here we have three uses of first use words out of Amos. And so here we have this word sod. It's used in Hebrews 11:37. And it's always thought, oh, it was because they sawed in half Isaiah. That's what this Hebrews 11:37, Manasseh sawed Isaiah in half. But this word has its first use, and it says they sawed the ones having one in the womb in Gilead. So probably Hebrews is referring to these pregnant women in Gilead that were sawn in half. And you can kind of look at each of those words and you can see this idea of first use. Here's that this idea of all these people in Hebrews 11:30 through 39. There's specific references to people in the Old Testament. He's just not making it up. He's actually referring to specific people. And then there's this, here's this idea of Amos, we're sawn apart. This probably represents a direct quote out of Amos. And so we have no problems when we talk about, oh, this word, this whole phrase is a quote from thus and so, but we have a kind of a problem to say we're sawn apart is a quote from Amos 1:3, perish is a quote from Genesis 18:23, and this word walls is a quote from the Exodus 14:22, which is the walls of the city of Jericho. So these are some of the ideas that are within this thing. Now, Paul uses this other literary devices. For instance, in Galatians, he has this idea of the word, no, there's no faith here. This is that same word faith that is used within Hebrews 11:30. Its first use is not with the verb form of the faith that is in Genesis 15:6. It's in Deuteronomy 32:20, which is this idea of the end of the age, Moses' song at the end of the age. And so that puts this idea of something is about to happen, but it's exemplified by all these people's faith. So then Paul uses this idea, this faith, in Deuteronomy. I will turn my face away from them. I will show them what is to be in the last times. So contextually, this word, this noun form of the word faith is used by Paul, and he he doesn't he has it everywhere in Galatians, but he doesn't have it in chapter 4. So this is the literary device of ellipsis. And within this section of Galatians 4, Paul uses an enthymeme. He says there's two sons, son of the promise, son of the flesh, two women, son of the bondwoman and the free woman, two covenants, obviously the Abrahamic covenant and the covenant from Sinai, two Jerusalems, but he just says one mountain. And then he says, quotes Isaiah 54:1, many more of the children of the sons of the children of the barren woman than the married woman, which is juxtaposed to Isaiah 52:13 to Isaiah 53:12, which is what happened on Golgotha. And so what he does is to strengthen the enthymeme that's to this point has been unrecognized. One of our fellows wrote an article, submitted it to Oxford, although it didn't get accepted, has some great comments on it. So to strengthen the enthymeme, he uses an ellipsis. So the ellipsis bit has been recognized, but not as a strengthening literary device. Then here is an interesting situation in Hebrews 11. The faithfulness of the children of Israel to return to Jacob, a foreshadowing of the Messiah, has 31 words that are associated with this word, and they all have to do with the rapture. So through word association, Paul links the event when the children of Israel will return to Messiah to this event we call the rapture. And he does it through like allusions to Enoch, allusions to Noah, in words like sheepskin, which is only related to Elijah and Elisha. So he uses all these kind of literary devices to do that. Here we have this idea, another word of out of Amos, may not be dislocated. And here's this idea of therefore lift up the hands that are hang down in the feeble knees, this idea of Israel when he was old, to do that. So and then this idea of we're united with him. And so this idea of all the with words, the being with words that Paul uses in this section, and the woof and the warp of the cloth, which has 10 uses of each and only used in this section of Leviticus. So Paul uses this very interesting connection of words, and says, we're with him, we're being with him. There's over 200 literary devices. There's no way to cover them all, but one of them is an Anacoluthon, which is means not following, a breaking off of the sequence of thought. So there's this idea, but from those who are reputed to be important, and here's this breaking off of a thought, whatever they might be, it makes no difference to me. God doesn't show partiality. So here is a literary device called an Anacoluthon. And so it's in Galatians 2, 6, and 9. And the question is there an Anacoluthon in the symbolative section of Exodus? Let's see, in the symbolative section of Exodus, is the Beth Essentii, and this idea of, is this the thought that he connected with this Anacoluthon that he talks about in Galatians? It's is yet to be determined. So those are some of the ideas that I've got. There's here we have this apposition in Ephesians 1:7. Paul uses, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses. So this is an apposition. And in the symborative section of Isaiah, it says, instead of a belt, a rope; instead of a well-set hair, baldness; instead of robe, wearing of sackcloth. So all these are appositions, just like what Paul did here. And these are both recognized appositions that are in both, and they're symborative. So it looks like Paul uses literary devices in a symborative way to get his message across. Very quite interesting. Hasn't been recognized before. Here's this idea of symborative words. All right. So he says, having predestined us for the adoption of children through Yeshua the Messiah to himself, according to the good pleasure, his desire, to the praise of the glory of grace, by which he freely gave us in the beloved. And in the symborative section of Isaiah, he says, I will sing indeed to the one being loved of me, a song of my beloved concerning his vineyard. So here's the same word, and then connecting this idea of beloved to Genesis 22, the Akita. So in this section, the word loved is not used in Ephesians, but the word loved is used in this section of Isaiah. So through this linkage of a single word, using beloved, Paul links Genesis 22:2 to this section of Isaiah and says, this is the son of promise right here, and this is the son of promise here. So this is a Hillel principle that Paul uses. So there's also this idea of intersecting midrashim, where Hebrews 3 is a midrash of the promise given to Abraham in Genesis 13, and then Galatians 3 is a midrash of the mighty works of God in the wilderness that starts in Exodus 12. So it's like this intersecting. He's talking about one thing and midrashing another, and in the other place he's talking about the thing and midrashing about the other. So very interesting how he does that. And it's not until you see the entire midrashim of Paul that you can kind of pick those apart, pick that out. So here it is right here. Here we have this idea in Hebrews 3:9, which is like a midrash of this. And then in Galatians, we have this midrash of this. But he's connecting these two areas together with his midrash. Very complicated. Here's this idea of a repetition of words. This is a really cool literary device. We see that often, like verily, verily, or amen, amen, I say to you. That's the literary device epixeusis. Well, in Hebrews 10:37, Paul quotes Isaiah 26:20 out of the Septuagint. He says, in a little while. Well, what is that a midrash of? It's actually a midrash of when Tamar had twins. And it's perfect because twins is a perfect epizeuxis. It's a pun. So he's using a literary device as a pun, and he is using it to midrash um, Zerach and Perez, who were the twins. And then in Hebrews 10:39, I think, he uses the phrase saving from destruction, where that word saving in 10:37 or 10:39, I think, has its first use in, I think, in Chronicles, describing when Zerach the Ethiopian came against Asa. So there's only 5 Zerachs in the Old Testament, but he uses a word, an analog. So it's a very Aristotelian rhetoric type of device through inference, through analog. So the analog is the other Zerach, the Ethiopian, but he is saying, or we're not going to shrink back. That's Zerah's life, the twin, the epizeuxis, the true epizeuxis is a twin. And it's just like, so he uses an inference through analog, and he uses an epizeuxis. And I'm telling you, these literary devices are everywhere. There's this idea in Ephesians 3:9. Paul uses 2 articles. There's no reason for Paul to use 2 definitive articles, but except he says the one is implied. So tota, panta, chrysante. So he uses 2 definitive articles. So that's an epizeuxis. Well, in Isaiah 26:3, which is similative to Ephesians 3:9, Isaiah says, shalom, shalom, perfect peace is how we translate it. But there's another epizeuxis, this idea of 2 definitive articles comes from this idea of perfect peace. And it's perfect because the one who created all things is the one who gives shalom, shalom. So it's a very interesting device. And so oftentimes you can find a literary device and you can find it in the simplified section. Here is the idea of the quote from Isaiah 26:20. In a little while, he who comes will come and won't shrink back. And so here's this idea of Zerach, who drew his hand back. He won't shrink back. And so here's the midrash of Zerach's birth. And here's the word, the saving of the soul. Here's this word that is the analog, points to an analog through inference, because it refers to Zerach the Ethiopian. All these things haven't really been looked at before, really. Here's a thing that I think should be your first article. It's I think it's an easier one, but it has to do with textual criticism. So here's this idea of the word administration in Ephesians 3:5-11. Some manuscripts use the word fellowship, koinonia, in this section, but I'd like to prove that the manuscripts that use the word administration, which is related to the word house, is the correct reading. All right, so here, let's see if I've got it. I'm hoping I've got it. Okay, so let's see if I actually have got it. I think I've got it. Okay, so earlier in Ephesians, Paul uses the word administration twice. And so one of them actually links up with the Shebna and the other guy, he'll give the keys of the kingdom to. And so I'll have to come back to that. So let's see. Let me see if I've got it down here. I know I wrote it down somewhere for you. No, I guess I'll have to find it. Let's keep going for now. Here's an anaphora, which is a use of an alternative word to avoid repetition. So he says, good news other than that which we preach to you. And then anaphora, that which you received. So he could have said, preach to you again, but he said, received. In Exodus, the simplificative section of the source text, the Egyptians made the children of Israel. And then instead of using the Egyptians again and the children of Israel, he uses the word they and them. This is an anaphora, and this is an anaphora. So Paul uses this assimilative, and like I said, there's over 200 of these literary devices, and Paul uses them, and he picks up on what is in the source text and uses them in the letter. So here it is, the side-by-side letter in the source text. Here's an anaphora with ellipsis. So that is avoiding the repetition and then leaving something out. So in Ephesians, he says, for our wrestling is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against worlds, rulers of the darkness of this age, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places. So he's saying, for our wrestling is not against flesh and blood. Our wrestling is against principalities. Our wrestling is against the powers. So he avoids using the word wrestling, and through the idea of ellipsis. And so here in Isaiah, he says, he has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. And he could have said, he has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives. He has sent me to release those who are bound. He has sent me to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. But he doesn't. He uses anaphora with ellipsis. Paul picks up on this in Isaiah and uses it in Ephesians. So sometimes the words aren't the same, but sometimes the literary device is the same. You get that? Is that cool?
Totally get that. That's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So so sometimes that's the only idea that you get is this literary device. And here it is side by side. Here's Appenolepsis, which is a repetition of initial part of a clause at the end of the same clause. So here we have this idea of whom God sent to be an atoning sacrifice through faith in his blood for a demonstration of his righteousness, to demonstrate his righteousness. So here's this idea of a repetition. And so in this area of Leviticus, he says, the Lord commanded, make atonement for yourself and make atonement as the Lord commandment. So here's this idea of commanded and make atonement. Here's another one in Ephesians. I didn't put the similitude one out of Isaiah. So there's this idea of literary devices that are everywhere. And here's a paradiastole next to alongside reframing, which is like a neither nor. I'm persuaded that neither death nor life phrase right here. Epistrophe, repetition of word at the end of successive clause. If God is for us, who can be against us? Us, that's an epistrophe. So these kind of devices can be looked for in the similitude sections. And if it's like a reflection, maybe it is in the section before in Leviticus. If it's like an anticipation, maybe it's in the section afterwards. So sometimes he uses anticipatory and reflective echoes as part of the literary device. Here's a Appenolepsis, repetition of a word or a phrase at the beginning and end of a sentence. And so this is a literary device that can be looked at in Exodus and Leviticus, respectively. Here's this idea of we are partakers of a heavenly calling. This idea of the calling of the laklaka of Abraham. So here Paul connects our calling to Abraham. At the very first of Romans, Paul connects his calling to the calling of Moses. So he often does this idea. Here in this quote of Psalm 95, he actually has 6 quotes of Psalm 95, and there's allusions to 6 different people who had a relationship with the pre-incarnate Messiah, including Adam, Moses, Joshua, David, Solomon, and one other, Abraham. So he has allusions in the places where he has 6 quotes of Psalm 95, has 6 allusions to people who've had a relationship to the pre-incarnate Messiah. Here's this idea of building a house. Yeshua, who's built a house. Moses, because he built the house, is more honored than the house. Here's this idea of building the Tower of Babel, right? So here's the other quotes of Psalm 95. Here's an interesting bracket where the entering of Abram and Sarah into Egypt is bracketed with the exit of his descendants out of Egypt. So here's those who have come out of Egypt. So here's a bracketing of the 2 events in history. Quite phenomenally done, I'd have to say. Here's this idea of the enthymeme. So he refers to Mount Sinai here, and he builds on the barren and the desolate one, which is the same words that are used in Exodus and the same words that Isaiah used in Isaiah 54:1. So he picks up on 2 words out of Exodus and connects the covenant given on Mount Sinai to the covenant given on this mountain here, which Isaiah recognizes and Paul sees as well. Here's this idea of this barren and desolate, the blood of the covenant and the glory of the Lord connected. So that is like a real quick one session. And I think, let me just show you what I'd like you to see if you'd be interested in working on. I think we should do something fairly straightforward, fairly easy, so fairly along your lines of translation, so you could get it done and catch up to Brandon. Let's see if I can find this other idea here. It's out of Ephesians and Isaiah, No one has written anything connecting Ephesians and Isaiah yet. So give it a second to load up, and I'll show it to you here. What's your daughter think about all this?
What do you think?
Oh, cool.
Right?
She's ready. She's ready to learn this stuff.
I
Well,
don't know if that's the word. It's very stretching. That's always that's a good thing. Okay.
huh. Well, let's see if I can find this idea. Administration. Okay, here we go. Let's see where we are. Okay, so let me share the screen. All right, here we go. Can you see this? Okay, so Ephesians is a midrash of Isaiah. Ephesians 10 through 14 is a midrash of Isaiah 5:30 through 7:25. Now, obviously, the sections in Isaiah are longer than Ephesians because Isaiah is a much longer book than Ephesians is. In this section, though, you can see these are the assemblative words. Now, there's a lot of reflective echoes and anticipatory echoes, and these echoes, both anticipatory and reflective, add to the fluidity of the discourse. Otherwise, it would be like disjointed. So it uses some of the words like this word house, manager of the house. And so here we have this idea of the manager of the house. So it's used, the actual word house is used in the previous section. Let me see if I can find it somewhere in here. And Paul builds upon it and uses the word administration. All right, so this word administration is used twice in Isaiah. So it's used in Isaiah 22, 19, and 21. And you would think, it ought to be used here in this section. All right, so now we'll go to Isaiah 22, 19, and 21 and see what's going on there. Give me a second. Here we go. So Isaiah 22, 19 or 16 through 25, 6 has to do with
You don't see your screen any longer.
Oh, you don't see it?
Yeah, your screen went away.
Oh, it went away. Let me see if I can bring it back. Sorry about that. How's that?
It is loading. Got it. Got it.
Okay. So this word administration, this idea is within the midrash of Shebna being replaced by Eliakim. And he's given the keys to the house of David. All right. So then this idea of, okay, this word administration right here is used right here and right here. It's used in 22, 19, and 21. So this is an unusual word. It's an uncommon word. And so it's an anchor point. You can't tug the New Testament from the Old Testament in any which way. So then in the very next section, Paul uses the word administration again. All right. And so this is where some manuscripts use the Greek word for fellowship. But it doesn't make sense that Paul would have just used the word administration as an anchor point here in this portion of Isaiah. In this section of Ephesians, he's just reflecting on that mystery. He's just reflecting back on what this idea. What is the mystery? What's the word? What's this? What's a mystery? That the Lord of hosts will swallow up death forever. That's the mystery. That is this revelation of the mystery, which was made known to me, understanding the mystery, this idea of the mystery. Well, what is this mystery? If you look at this idea, it has been hidden in God. That word has been hidden has its first use in when Elisha raises the Shunammite son, and it was hidden to Elisha that he would be raised from the dead, because he, first of all, he was the one who predicted his birth, but his death was hidden from him. So it's this idea. Yeah, is that beautiful? So this idea. So here through Midrash, we can say Paul is, first of all, he's commenting on the administration of the house of David. Who is Shebna? Shebna is a foreshadowing.
Evil guy who was fired.
Yep. Yeah. Who is Eliakim? Eliakim foreshadows the Messiah. And I think if you'll find out what Eliakim's name means, you'll see that, that foreshadows the Messiah. So
yeah, it's actually there's another connection there. It's also first Adam, second Adam.
Okay, good. Yep. So I think what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take this idea of administration, look at all the manuscripts and try to figure out, okay, which manuscripts say fellowship, which manuscripts say administration, how that's been translated, and then use textual criticism, use Midrash for textual criticism, which has not been done before.
Okay.
So typically for textual criticism, we use date of a manuscript, place of a manuscript, other things regarding the manuscript, but no one's ever used Midrash for that.
It's a clever concept. I like it.
Right? It's a totally out of the box concept. So what
I like out of the box. That's who I am.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll send you I'll send you a PDF of this PowerPoint.
Okay.
And you can kind of you can just say a Midrash of Isaiah has been discovered in the book of Ephesians, and just leave it at that. And that you're going to use, discussion of that is beyond the scope of your article. Your article is really just going to talk about textual criticism and build upon that. and using midrash as the the source for textual criticism.
Awesome. I could handle that. This is good.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Great
yeah.
question.
I have 3 other textual criticism articles to build on, like like the Aldine text, or the, a certain text will use this word or whatever. And I think we could get really 4 good articles on textual criticism that will be right along your line of translation of the Bible.
That's a great idea. Great idea. Great connection.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we don't try to put you in a different ballpark and have you play hockey on a football field or something.
Right.
What do you think?
I like it a lot. Thank you.
Okay. So
I love textual criticism. It's one of my hobbies.
okay, so the first thing I think you guys you ought to do is figure out a journal to put it in. Okay.
Yep.
And
I've got it. Yep.
Okay, if you got a journal, then you figure out the format, the style and everything.
Yeah.
And then I don't know how you write articles. I write an outline and then I fill it in, because I'm fairly conversant what I'm going to talk about. I just need to fill it in and put references to actually substantiate my what I'm saying. So
yeah, I start with a summary statement or summary paragraph, and then fill it out after that, which is
okay.
kind of a standard journal format anyway.
Well, some journals don't have abstracts, so I guess the very first thing that I recommend people doing when they write articles is to find the journal that you're interested in doing it to. And I don't think you're going to get it in certain journals because they just don't deal with textual criticism.
Yep. Yeah, I'll do a little more research. I've got a couple in mind, but I'll do a little more research and see which one would be most appropriate, because there are some that specialize in specific books of the Bible and that kind of thing. So yeah.
All right, let me make sure that all right, hang on, let me stop recording.